Welcome to another episode of Cleantech Geek. I have the pleasure to have with me today Mr. Francesco Girardi, who is the Senior Director of Bluefield Partners. Francesco, thank you very much for accepting my invitation.
Thank you for coming.
What we're going to do as usual is we're going to have a casual chat. We're going to try to give you some insights on the industry, discuss about some current developments, and try to give some valuable hints about where the industry is going. So, Francesco, before we start, could I have a very brief introduction about yourself and about Bluefield Partners, please?
I joined the Bluefield Partners in 2013, and the time I joined the company was just after the successful IPO of the first permanent capital vehicle dedicated to investing in solar farms in the UK. It was an interesting time because we just I joined just after raising £130 million, which we had to quickly deploy into the market, and was also right time to enter the rock market in the UK, because there are a number of opportunities to invest the money. My experience in solar started in 2005. Prior to that, I worked in another industry, semiconductor industry. And then in 2005, decided to join this new exciting sector. And I started working as a developer and with a NewCo, which was very ambitious in terms of business model. And then we were acquired by an Australian investment bank, Babcock and Brown, and then was responsible for developing projects within Babcock and Brown Europe. Then in 2009 I moved to a different area of the sector. I worked for an REC system, the branch of REC Group, the manufacturing company for modules, where I set up the EPC construction business in Italy. And I worked for that for 4 years, and been responsible of developing, building, structuring equity and debt financing, and then sale assets, which the company initially built on our own balance sheet. And then Bluefield now.
That's an exciting journey.
Yes, I think it is. And also, it gave me the opportunity to be involved in different part of the value chain, starting from development, construction, operation, maintenance, asset management, and investment.
Did you ever believe when you started back in 2005, I started in 2006, did you ever believe that we would reach that point in so short period of time?
That's a very good question. I mean, there was an expectation, definitely, that we would have become we as an industry, will have become very relevant within the energy mix worldwide. But I think the time they take maybe was more accelerated than I thought. I remember that when we were in 2011, 2012, when we, after the impact of the Spanish retroactive cut on the feed-in tariff, and Italy was the second booming market at the time, we were wondering whether there could have been similar actions by the government in Italy, and people were talking about grid parity. And it was funny because, as very frequently happened in our industry, all the different forecasts, projection, etc., were partially wrong. A lot of people spend quite a lot of time understanding what does grid parity mean. And now we have the first project in grid parity only in 2018, 2019 in Southern Europe. Being a new industry, quite immature, there were a number of challenges in predicting reliable forecasts, which is normal, which is not unexpected, because there are a lot of different factors which might influence full deployment of solar or renewable energies.
And Bluefield Partners, I know you're very active in the UK. You have a portfolio here. You also have a portfolio in Italy. Tell us a bit about Bluefield Partners, and do you look at any other areas currently?
Bluefield Partners, started with after looking at in the initial period. The company was established in 2009. After the initial period where the partners were focusing on Italy mainly and Spain, then around 2010-11, following also the first announcement from the Italian former Prime Minister of Economy about banning agricultural use for photovoltaic, and worried about the potential impact of retroactive cuts and other government actions, they decided to shift their focus to the UK, which was a good move because they started with the feed-in tariff projects, and then they were already here with a good track record in the UK to invest in a renewable obligation certificate scheme. So then we, at the time we operated, the UK was the only active market in Europe. So that's why our focus was justified also for our presence, local presence here. Our focus, because of our investors were mainly UK-based investors. The initial focus was only the UK. But now, given our track record, our good reputation, of course, and performances of the funds with our investors, and following, of course, the fact that the market is now widening up in Europe, we decided also to expand our investment in Europe. And as you said, so now Bluefield has acquired a first portfolio of Italian assets. We have a first construction plant in the Netherlands, and we are also under exclusivity now on a first project in France. Okay. So we are moving our first steps in these core countries, and we are also evaluating a number of projects in Spain, and probably will get into exclusivity on a new project which is on the final stage of development in Spain. As I said, we are moving the first steps into this market, but also on the fundraising side, we are very much active in raising fund for a European private vehicle, which is going to invest in 5 European countries, France, Netherlands, Italy, Spain, and Portugal.
Excellent. That's excellent development. However, we are moving now into a different kind of environment. Everybody's talking about the unsubsidized environment, which I think it's a normalized environment. It allows us to operate as a more commercially focused sector. But that essentially creates a challenge for developers, asset owners, that perhaps they need to take a different risk profile and start investing a bit earlier, engaging with all the different stakeholders, mainly the developers, but also the service providers that they will come after. So it's a more kind of holistic view to the whole value chain instead of just looking at the developer and the EPC.
Definitely.
So talk to us about some of the challenges on the developing side, and what do you think would be how would you perceive this kind of the barriers that you need to go through when you start building unsubsidized solar?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that moving a bit further upstream into the value chain of project development and construction will definitely be a good move, but it does require different competencies than the one that are usually available in more investment-focused kind of investment company or investment advisors. At Bluefield, we have across the team, across the group, we have expertise which we can easily deploy and cover, which allow us to cover early stage development activities. And definitely this is something that we are very keen of implementing. Indeed, one of our in our investment policy for the new fund, we have allocated a portion of the capital we raised to fund the development projects. And so the challenge, I think, is to be available, to be ready to, first of all, fund good projects and good developers. No, having been working on the development, on the project development field before, and I see that the main issues is that for entering into this development market doesn't have any barrier. Even people with very scarce competencies can start developing projects, and we did it. We have seen this so in the past. Of course, now the things are slightly different because developing projects on a unsubsidized scheme does require different skills as well as different expertise. Because besides the traditional scouting for good land, then you searching for scouting for lands where there are no particular environmental constraints or other permitting issues, being very expert in the planning process. Then the other is besides those, then you have to structure probably a good financial product, and you have to ensure that the costs of the development of the project you are proposing, of course, they could meet investor expectations. So then they have to be structured in the way as a developer to be very efficient, to have a very quick and speedy process to go through planning. Otherwise, the longer it will take, the higher the cost for the company will be. Yes. So that means that we need the more, skilled and expert developers. That's one challenge. The second is definitely access to the grid, because we see that as a characteristic of the renewable energy industry being distributed, we still have issues in the local grid, access to the local grid. And I think that what the industry has to do overall is to engage more with the local distribution system operator or transmission system operators to understand how we can collaboratively work together to ensure that there is not a rush to secure the last capacity available in every substation, and then we can have an opportunity also to deploy widespread project across the country.
So one of the challenges that I see is, it's also an opportunity, you would like, that now we have to deal with market dynamics. That means that we have to deal with electricity prices, we have to deal with utility or corporate PPAs, that they have different demands, that the power producers can actually be penalized if they don't deliver on the contract. So do you think that a combination now, that we need to change perhaps or evolve a bit and go from solar only into a more combined situations where you add solar and you have batteries as well on your sites, so you can start, you can play by leveraging on energy and creating this kind of arbitrage that you need, and play with when you're going to sell to the grid, because you're going to have situations where the production is going to be so high that the electricity prices are going to be negative.
Yeah.
So do you see now the projects become a bit more sophisticated and more developed, and do you see especially battery storage being more of an investment case on a co-location situation?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. And as you rightly said, in the unsubsidized market, depending on the company strategy about merchant exposure or long fixed PPAs, then there will be definitely a need of ensuring that your PV plants are flexible enough to meet the energy demand on the market, as well as compete on pricing. Everyone is concerned about following, higher penetration of renewable distributed generation system into the grid, and in particular solar. There will be negative prices at the peak hours of high demands, and we've seen this happening in few other countries already. So that's why having the ability of being flexible in terms of generating or reducing your capacity to, or your electricity injected into the grid based on the market dynamics will be definitely very, very important. And storage at the moment seems to be a potential solution to this, to allow to increase flexibility. And then also the potential of maybe co-locating solar farms with wind, or within the same area, or of course wind and solar within the same portfolio, because most of the time it can happen that when the sun is shining, wind is not blowing, or vice versa.
So you need to have that diversification of portfolios on more than just one technology in order to perhaps meet
exactly
or reduce the risk for the off-takers, for the power off-takers.
And also being able to capture better price on the market.
But this leads on another question, that this kind of more sophisticated way of operations means that the asset management and the O&M has to evolve as well.
Yeah.
And this creates a huge pressure on the innovation side, on the tool side, on the data management side. We need different skill set in the people that will service these assets. And there is always a notion that the service providers will have to invest and evolve themselves. But on the asset owner side, are the asset owners ready to pay for some of these developments that will be required?
That's a very good point indeed. Given that we've been seeing a lot of price pressure so far on the services as well as on the construction cost. And I agree with you that the new market in which we are going to operate does require different skills, which also involve the investment advisory part of it. And also it depends on where the management of the PPA strategy will be sitting, and depending on the various investment advisor strategy on that. In Bluefield, for example, so far for our UK portfolio, we have decided that the PPA strategy is core competencies and responsibility of the investment advisor, because we'll have an important impact on our ability to deliver on the investor returns. And even if we have our in-house asset management and then service teams, we have decided that this area will still be core competencies, as I said, of the investment advisor. At least in terms of negotiating the contract, identify the right strategy, etc. When it goes into the day-to-day management of the contract, the day-to-day operation of the contract, or management of the asset in case of collocation or other, and the ability to control the flow of energy, electricity based on the market demands, then this has to be, this could be a service where asset manager definitely can create value for the company and offset from the other side, the price pressure that we are facing now on the asset management. Asset management we have seen a different number of fees paid, different fees paid on the asset management in Europe. Of course, it's difficult when it goes to comparing, ensuring that you compare Apple with Apple, because you have to be sure that the list of services as well as the guarantees when it goes to the O&M, they are comparable. But to offset that price pressure, company like asset manager and then providers have to maybe have to be able to provide more services, which I think, of course, investor will be happy to pay.
I feel that in the industry we are self-cannibalizing ourselves, in a sense that I think that we need to decide that it needs to be some sort of a floor that you cannot go below. And despite discussing these sort of issues for the last 3-4 years now, it seems that we're not learning from mistakes, and we see more and more companies feeling price pressure on the services side, or trying to gain market share with the wrong strategy or the wrong reasons. So it doesn't really matter how many megawatts you have. I think the KPIs should be if you're making money or not. And I can understand that there are natural competitive drivers that you're going to have people or companies being much more competitive than others. But I think that we need to start perhaps working better together, asset providers, asset owners, grid operators, service providers, to create perhaps different business models where you're sharing risk, but you're sharing upside as well, or identify other ways to start reducing cost, either through innovation or tools. But again, I think the question remains: are we ready to invest in data-driven systems? Are we ready to make the necessary investments both in tools and people to drive the sector forward? And I'm not quite sure whether we have a consensus across the board on that, because the cost is going to be a serious cost.
Yeah, when it comes to investing in new technology or innovate, definitely it's a question that as a manager or director of a company, you have to have a good case, to ensure that if you inject money, you are able to drive efficiency or innovate in your processes. Innovating in terms of ability to be more autonomous and automated in terms of data analysis and data reporting is something that at the moment, given the different also products available on the market, is an affordable investment. Because depending on the company size, depending on the portfolio, depending on the feature of the software or the platform that you would like to add to your company business, then you can have a different range of cost and offers. But the other point is also the business model. I think that the price pressure on, particularly on O&M, was mainly driven by the fact that when at the very beginning of this industry, the O&M costs were very, very high, because O&M contractors on one side were very cautious and about being exposed to too much risks. In terms of guaranteeing performances, guaranteeing availability was quite a risk for them, because the industry was not mature. There was also a possibility to squeeze higher fees because of the incentive market. On the incentive market, there was space for a bit of increasing the fees paid for some services. But now the market is completely different, and I understand where people are coming, that they are scared maybe to pay too much for services which eventually they don't get. So the compromise here is, first of all, to make sure that your O&M provider is providing good services, which I'm afraid is not always the case.
Is this why you've decided to insource?
This was one of the reasons. The other reason was that we have seen that the O&M, when it goes to operation and maintenance activities on the site, there was a lot of inefficiency, because there were few companies specialized in doing that job, and there were still a number of layers between the SPV, the owner, and the ultimate electrical engineer who was on site operating and maintaining the site. And this inefficiency, which cause additional cost, at the same time cause a slowdown in terms of time to repair and time to fix faults. So coming back to the business model point, I think that definitely I agree that also the O&M contractor business model should change or could change in two ways to me. Either to provide more flexible services, maybe on-demand services, or in a situation where there is a potential to have a core services paid as a base fees, and then additional services which can be introduced also by the O&M contractor to improve the performance of the site, so that on a profit sharing mechanism they can benefit also for additional revenues that an asset owner can generate for having better job done by the O&M contractor. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or potentially another way could be, which I appreciate, can be quite transforming, mm-hmm. and raise a lot of consequence and concern, is to integrate asset management and O&M within the same entities.
That's very radical thinking.
I think it is indeed, because traditionally asset manager have been seen as the people policing the O&M, or maybe saying in a more positive way, the one that were ensuring that the O&M contractor fulfill the contractual obligation, is responding on time, is keeping the plan up and running as they should. But there are a number of activities like monitoring, reporting, managing ticketing system, etc., which are more project management activities or management of services, which are duplicated between the two companies. And this is inefficient. So maybe what I would like to say is that in an integrated world, which is challenging, as I said, and we have to find a way to ensure that the potential conflict of interest between asset manager and them is dealt with properly, by ensuring that the ultimate goal of both companies should be to generate more revenues for the investors.
Absolutely.
So then in this way, the asset manager could be still responsible or looking after the performances of the asset, and then the O&M contractor just focusing on fixing, remedying issues, faults, or improving the performances or carrying out preventive maintenance.
I think this is I would tend to agree with you. I think that we need to start seeing different models. Perhaps in this kind of situation, I would start introducing things like independent monitoring services. So you have some of the functional project management elements that perhaps create a bit of friction between the core stakeholders being taken away from the core contracts. So that creates a bit of transparency between the different involved parties. So there is definitely, I think, room for innovation. I would totally agree that. But it takes the first company to start looking at it this way. I think companies like yourself, perhaps other larger companies like Next Energy, like Foresight, they have the capability to insource some of these services, some of these activities, and this is where you see perhaps synergies between O&M and asset management within the same environment, the same umbrella. Going into a slightly different subject, I mean, you're still investing in the UK, you're still investing in Europe. Do you see Brexit, as we have the elections in a month from now, do you see Brexit creating any serious issues on your investment planning?
Definitely yes, at least in terms of uncertainty. Uncertainty in the business, in investment, is definitely the worst or the highest unpredictable risk that you have to mitigate and manage. How the Brexit could affect UK subsidy-free development or deployment of plants? In many ways. First of all, in terms of potential costs of importing goods from Europe. or other countries. The second is workers, definitely, because we know that in the UK there was not a huge or big or consolidated, there isn't, EPC solar business. There were very few local EPC contractors, but most of them, they didn't have enough local main workers. And we have seen a lot of works subcontracted to European companies, to Spanish company, to German company, to Italian, Polish, Eastern European companies, etc. And definitely this could have an impact if UK will decide to be more restrictive in terms of immigration rules. And those could have an impact on costs at the time where we need to lower the cost and make sure that the COE of generating electricity from solar in the UK is competing with other electricity generation costs into the market. I think this is one of the main challenges to me. And the immediate impact, depending on how and when, because any decision UK will be taking, either a hard Brexit or a more softer approach like the Labour proposal, etc., will take ages to crystallize in a clear trade agreements between the involved parties. So the delay in getting a resolution to the Brexit dilemma will have a direct effect on the further delays to finalize whatever trade agreements will be on the table.
And uncertainty is not good for him.
And this definitely is not good. At the time, again, in a market where we needed to bring the cost down.
Also, you've touched the workers from the APC side. I think one of the other things that I would add to that is that we see more and more, at least that's my personal experience, we find it more difficult to attract high-level talent in key positions within organizations. Do you find this here as well? I mean,
definitely.
It was much more easier before the Brexit discussion to have experienced people that have worked in France, in Germany, in Spain, in Italy, or wherever else, that you could attract that talent to London, to the UK, and add direct value to what you do. Now, this kind of proposition of moving to the UK for this type of high educated, value added people have become less and less attractive.
Definitely, I agree with you. We are facing similar problems, and in the past few years was very, very easy. Actually, there were a lot of people candidating themselves for position in whatever EPC, asset management, O&M, etc. And at the moment, that's more difficult. It's definitely a direct consequence of Brexit. It could be potentially also due to other non-UK related effects, like the fact that the Spanish market is restarting again, the Italian market as well is promising, Greek market is also starting again, etc. So people in this uncertainty, maybe they don't see attractive to move to UK or other countries where they compare the benefit they can have by moving with the security they can have by staying in their own countries.
You've touched about the European developers and the development markets. So how do you see, what is your personal opinion about about Europe? How do you see Europe transforming, and where do you see, what are the hot markets at the moment? Because I'm hearing contradictory opinions about Spain, for example. People are under the opinion that the market is going to be overheated, and it's extremely hard to go from 3 gigawatts to 47, 50 gigawatts that they are discussing. Also on markets like the Netherlands, if you take out the subsidies, the SDE, then it starts looking a bit more less attractive. Then Italy and Greece, as you said, are perhaps bouncing back in a sense, but there is there is a degree of caution that people should take in this market. So what is your personal opinion? How would you see the European outlook?
I think that challenging but promising.
Mm-hmm.
Challenging because of some of the points you made. At the moment, Netherlands is mainly driven by ST plus incentive schemes. There are a lot of projects under development, and also the particular challenge specific to Netherlands will be floating solar system, because it's one of the country in Europe where the pipeline of floating solar system is bigger than in other countries. And we have seen some announcement about new floating solar system being developed or became operational. Spanish market is I think is in a bubble now, and because they were after being banned for open to solar investment or development since years, a lot of focus now, everyone has been focusing on developing projects in Spain, which of course is a contributor, or is alimented by the fact that there is it's quite a large country, so space is not an issue, land is not an issue, and irradiation is a very high level in Europe. But I'm always scared about big boost and bust approach, because this is when people start getting worried and confused. I was last week in Frankfurt at attending the Solar Asset Management Europe conference, and there was a session of people talking about German subsidy free. And I was surprised by hearing that one of the challenges that developers are facing in Germany was about people reluctance to get more solar in their own their close neighbor areas. It's like coming back of the NIMBY effect, not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard.
And also local municipalities seems a bit concerned about massive deployment of solar in an uncontrolled way. I think this is the challenge that we potentially we are facing, we could face in this market, which is now a bit more open, and I think we should either to prevent this going to happen by maybe engaging with the local municipality or government at the regional or national level to work together, maybe to have a more, say, planned approach, like maybe having a sort of planning approach in terms of allocating capacity per region. Because we know that it's a matter of fact that if now it's viable to build solar farms in Southern Europe, then if the cost revenues will be matching each other, then we can build subsidy free in northern European countries where the sun or the number of hours, the yield is lower. But so that if we can spread, with the help of municipality, with the help of support of a distribution system operator and transmission system operator, to spread, the deployment of a solar and distributed generation system across the country, this will have a beneficial effect, so that people can have more, measured way to develop project rather than being concentrated in specific regional promises.
Being very conscious of time, and I'm going to make a last question. What would be your thoughts? What would be, if tomorrow you were to consult the government, what kind of, the UK government, and what kind of policies they should put in place to help deployment of renewable energy, both solar and wind? What would be your approach? Would you advise for another round of CFD? Would you say we had enough of subsidies, let us build and make things more favorable on the planning side? What would be your approach, your advice to them?
I think that one first suggestion will be to to have the ability to have a more clear framework, regulatory framework, within which deployment of distributed generation systems goes hands in hand with enhancement of the grid infrastructure. Mm-hmm. The second probably should be around storage and ancillary services to the grid. Because at the moment, and we have seen recently in August, the first example in the UK of rush hour blackout. So this could be potentially an issue which could become worse and worse over time if the penetration of distributed generation to the grid increases. This is not to say that we have to stop it from happening, but we have to find a way to better manage it. Mm-hmm. So again, potentially incentive schemes to enable distributed generation system or asset owners to cooperate with the DSOs and TSOs to improve the management of the grid and the stability of the grid.
That's a very different approach and very interesting approach. So you're not saying you should be having a subsidy on the generation of the yield, but a subsidy to help the grid manage itself more in a more efficient way, to put the technology and the controls necessary to create this kind of interactivity.
The background is because the solar farm can self-generate, so subsidy-free projects have been developing in the UK. There have been some operational sites as well. So that means that due to low LCOE, then we can compete on the market. But then the issue is how long can we generate? How flexible the grid is to receive all the electricity produced and manage the demand and the generation.
Francesco, thank you very much for your time. Very interesting discussion. I look forward for the next time.
Thank you very much.